On today's episode of the show, we are joined by Chris Ackie. Chris is a Laurier alum who's now playing in the CFL and recently signed with the Toronto Argonauts. Chris, thanks for making the time, and we appreciate you being here.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So, we have a few good questions. I wanted to get kind of right into that. You were a big time defensive back at Laurier, played boundary half, moved kind of around the defense a bit. But when you went to the pros, you've kind of transitioned to more of a linebacker position. And I think that there's a lot of guys out there, whether they're in high school, moving to university, or maybe even in university, or even younger guys that have to change positions and kind of adapt. What was that process like for you, and what advice do you have to players that might be going through a positional transition themselves?
Honestly, it was a really fun process. At first I thought I'd be kind of like a little nervous, but okay, I'm going from playing back at safety or boundary half, like now I'm in the box a little bit. But honestly, the transition fit my game a lot. Like I was always a guy, even at DB, that I'll come up, I'll hit you, I'll play press coverage. I'd love to be in the run game. So that transition to will kind of a natural transition for me because the will spot, I really noticed the will spot in the CFL. It's not like that big, typical linebacker you get down south. You know what I mean? That 250, 240. You're not that big. You're in coverage a lot. So I know with team defense corners that I've worked with, they've always loved that I've been able to cover first before going into the box. So I've always been rotated high as a safety, or I've come down, okay, you can cover more than just a running back. You might put you on 2 weak, which is typically one of the best receivers. So sometimes I'm covering the 2 weak, covering the best receiver on the team sometimes. So, and then I'm also big enough and physical enough to be able to mix up in the run game as well. So that will transition is it's really fun for me. And I love playing linebacker.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, there's a lot of guys that I've coached in the summer that whether they're D linemen that become O linemen, or you have a guy that might be a big D lineman when he's younger, but then, he kind of becomes more of a linebacker. Or there's tons of those position switches out there. And I think oftentimes, guys are kind of nervous about it. Like, what was kind of your approach? And I know it sounds like a pretty fun transition, but what was kind of your approach in learning that game from a different, viewpoint? And like, what advice would you have for guys that are making that transition?
I'd say you got to embrace it. Embrace the change. Like change is good. Like you might be a little nervous at first, but eventually, like you'll eventually you'll come to terms with it. You'll come to love it. I'd say with anyone who's still kind of in that transition period, just to you got to just focus and you got to treat it like just treat it like how you would your normal position. You might not, for example, D lineman that go to O lineman. You might not love it at first, but eventually you're going to learn to love it. And then from there, you got to just put in the work. And you got to train the same how you would as, say, your old position, how your new position. You got to put in the work. If that's watching more film, if that's getting on the field more, if that's learning from other players. Like that's what I did to be able to make that transition. And for me, it was good at linebacker, because you got to learn the whole defense. I remember when I played DB, I knew the secondary, I knew the linebackers doing, but I had no clue what the D-line were doing. Because I didn't care. I'm like, you know what, I don't really have to interact with them. But as a linebacker, you in the middle, you got to know what's happening behind you and what's happening in front of you. And they always come to you when they have questions, hey, where do I line up? Where do I go? They know they're coming to the two linebackers anyway. So you got to be able to get everyone lined be able to get everyone lined up. So it kind of helps you help me build as a leader.
Yeah, I think I made a transition from a D lineman to an offensive lineman at the university level. And, I have other, former teammates that are either in coaching now or, wound up having a really good transition. And ultimately, I think for a lot of guys, they get stressed out about all the coaches are asking me to move, or, I have to move, because then they get focused on, they think it's about what they can't do. And usually it's really about what they can do. So a guy like yourself who's, big enough to play in the box at the pro level, but has those coverage skills that you developed as a collegiate player. It's more usually when guys are making the position switch, it's more about what they can do versus, what you may see it initially as, they don't think I'm good enough to play D-line, or they don't think I'm good enough, to play DB. But really it's more about what you can do and what you can bring to the team. So I think that's a great point. One of the other kind of common questions I'm going to try and ask a lot of the guys we have come on is just talking about what they think makes a great player, on their side of the ball. So for you, how would you finish the sentence? Every great defensive player is or does blank. What would you kind of categorize that? What makes a great defensive player a great defensive player?
Okay. I'd say what makes a great defensive player is someone that could take calculated risk. And I say calculated risk, like don't just be like, hey, I'm just gonna start jumping everything. I'm just gonna rush into this gap just because. You gotta make sure, and calculated risk, it comes back to film study. Kind of trust what you see on film, trust tendencies you see, and then be able to take those calculated risks during the game to make a big play for your team.
Yeah, that's such a good example. And I think often people look at, players that are really instinctive or make big plays, and they talk about, oh, they have that natural ability, or that word instinctive, and really most of the time it comes down to guys that are really well prepared, right? They obviously have, you get to higher levels than the level you're at, but even if you look at great high school players, there are some great high school players that are great athletes, and there are other guys, the guys that you really remember are not just good athletes, they're not just taking chances, they're making consistent great plays because they're so well prepared. So, I think that's
Yeah.
a great point for our guys to remember, is that, you watch these guys on TV and you think, wow, I could never be like that guy, or that's amazing, and really a lot of it comes down to hard work, and you can't really control, all the time athletically what you're given, but that those big plays really come from that preparation.
No, you're definitely right. One thing I'd even say to high school kids, 'cause I remember when I was in high school, I didn't really, I loved football. I still love football, but I just loved it because I was playing Madden. I just loved competing. So I just let my athletic ability take me to where it's taken me. Right? Especially in high school, you can get away with that. If I could go back, I would actually learn the game and more like study film, study the opponent more in high school. It would just make life so much easier. That's something I kind of learned when I got to university, where it's like, hey, everyone's good athletes here. You got to bring something else to the table. That's the way you kind of prepare for a game in the classroom before you go into the field.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's such an underrated part of, the maturation process of a player is, I think we all love football, right? And we can all think of guys that we played with that love football, but never really achieved their full potential. And you think of other guys that, love football, and that love of the game, and people, kind of teach them how to learn and how to go about developing, and they really bought into that, and it really changes what you're capable of doing. Like I think of a guy that I coached at Laurier, Mario Villamizar, who came in as a receiver, another guy position change, came in as a receiver, first year didn't sniff a dress roster, but was so committed to the process of making himself better. And those little things that people don't ever see, wind up now he's playing in the pros. So, I think that's
Yeah.
such a good point. And all of us love the game. Use that love of the game to better yourself. Madden's fun. There's a time and place for that. Certainly right now, there's lots of time for that.
Hmm.
But, you want to try and use the resources you have, whether that's a high school coach, whether that's, your summer football team, whether that's the weight room, whatever it is. Like, let that love of the game build something for you versus just kind of, coming and going from the game as a lot of guys do.
Yeah, like a lot of people think like, hey, I'm the best on my team, so I'm set. We got to realize there's always someone out there better than you. And eventually when you get to from high school to university, you get all the MVPs from their own team, all on one team. So you got to make sure you bring something else to the table, be able to outwork everyone.
Yeah, for sure. So turn into a more, maybe a little more skill aspect, player driven aspect. One of the things I think is so important, and obviously safe tackling is something that's brought up all the time, and it's super important to us continue to grow our game. The Canadian game's tough because the field's huge, and I don't think,
Yeah.
I didn't even really realize. I think I went to my first U.S. college game, when I was in grade 9, and I remember like, looking at the field and going, oh, this is such a cool stadium. I'm like, man, the field's small, and
Mhm.
and so tackling, especially in the Canadian game, is so hard for guys, I think, to learn because there's so much space, and ball, people have the unlimited motion, leverage is always changing, people are throwing the ball around a little bit more. So as a guy that obviously is playing a linebacker position, having to make a lot of tackles and probably a huge variety of tackles from, your inside run fits to, covering down on the number two receiver, like you said, what advice do you have or what do you kind of focus on when you're in those real open field situations? Maybe it's special teams or, running back caught a screen and you're trying to close the space down, receiver caught the ball on the other side of the field, whatever it is. When you're in those open space tackling situations, what do you focus on and how does that help you be a solid tackler in space?
Then everyone who plays defense knows open field tackling is one of the hardest things you can do. And for me, it's like you kind of you got to play fast and don't hesitate. Because if I'm going to hesitate to that running back or that receiver that catches the football, that's just more space for him to make me miss. So if I'm going to get there, if I'm going to miss a tackle, I'll make sure I miss it going full speed or going fast into it. But I'm not going to hesitate too much. I'm going to get there, break down when I get within maybe a yard of them, then go out there and make the tackle. But you don't want to break down too early. That's just more space for you to get juked because at this point you kind of get your feet stopped. Your feet get flat, then he's just going to take off on you. So one thing is just play fast.
Yeah, especially in the big space, like you can't hesitate, right? And the more time the ball carrier has to make a move, to read the situation, maybe to get back into balance, that certainly makes it a more difficult tackle. So, in terms of maybe even on special teams, you're covering down the field on punt, you have a job, but so often stuff changes and, a play breaks one way and all of a sudden you're in that kind of scramble drill. One of the cool things I've been looking into and asking a few different people about is when you recognize a ball carrier's in open space, obviously you're trying to react to where he's at and get to the carrier as fast as you can. What are you trying to keep your eyes on, and how does that help you in that tracking process? Because I think a lot of guys just see a lot of stuff working across their face, and it's hard for guys to really focus in on where they need to go quickly. So when you're tracking a ball carrier in space, what's your main, where are your eyes at, and how does that help you get to the ball?
Oh, especially if you're on punt, you definitely got to keep your head on a swivel because you never know when someone's going to just pop you quick, right? So, but with the returner, you got to realize, I know what I realize, he probably runs a 4-3, 4-4. I don't run a 4-3 or a 4-4. So I'm like, I got to have my angle, my pursuit angle to not where he's at, but where he's going. So I got to make sure I take the appropriate angle to even cut him off. Because especially on special teams, you're all working as a team. Hey, if I might take an angle that's too aggressive to cut him off and he cuts back, I know I'm relying on the next man to make sure to be there to clean up. Because if I can get the returner just to settle his feet for a second, then I know the rest of my guys are going to get there and make a tackle. So sometimes it's all about taking the right pursuit angle.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's such a big point. The big Canadian field is tough, and I think that's one thing. People talk about all this space to throw the ball, and they talk about that aspect of it, and I don't think they talk enough about how much more difficulty it can create in tackling because you're just coming from so much farther away. So that's a great point. More of a scheme type question. When you're facing, and you probably face a lot, empty sets, so 42, 33, no running back in the backfield. I think that's something that's become a little more common in the high school game and the summer ball game. Is there any kind of strategy that you've liked to be a part of as a defensive player? If a team's going to go empty, they're throwing the ball out empty, what are you kind of hoping that your defensive coordinator has dialed up?
Man, this one's tough just because there's a bunch of different ways you can play it. For me personally, just 'cause I'm a cover guy first, I don't mind manning it up because I know when I see empty, I'm getting a quick throw. I'm getting a quick throw, or I'm going to get, depends who that quarterback, I might get a quarterback draw. So I really don't mind just manning it up. But there's other ways you can play it. I know in Montreal we used to play it this way. We used to, sometimes we did cover 4, or other times we called it Boston. So what we would do here, we'd lock up our field corner on number 1 out there, just eliminate him, take him out, right? So we're playing 11 on 11 now, shorten the field. So then we play kind of a cut to the boundary and then have our Sam on the field side go curl the flat and have the field half high, have the safety high, boundary half high. So, and then the safety, he's playing he's playing really. He's looking at three, either three strong or three weak. Depends where the quarterback looks. Because we know we're getting a quick throw most likely. So then he can trigger a lot quicker than he would normally. Then I know it's the linebackers here too. Like I said, as a will too and empty, there's no point in me being tight in the box. You know what I mean? I know, hey, let's work out. I know the hole is. The hole is going to be right on the numbers. Right in that void is going to be the hole. That's going to be the hot throw. I might get a double sit right there by 2 and 3. So I know I need to get out quick. So I already start to expand. And that's why I kind of look to go 3 to 2 and kind of get right to that hole. Then I know my safety is going to back me up if number 3 goes vertical or runs a dig. So you could do that. But even for the D-line, I kind of like to force the quarterback to one side. I don't want to push the pocket where he can have a perfect vision to throw downfield. I'd rather do some type of maybe like an exit stunt. Maybe take the end, let him spike into the B, let the tackle wrap, and kind of force the quarterback one way. Just get pressure him, force him out of the pocket, make him comfortable.
Yeah, I think as we've run a ton of empty in some of the teams that I've been involved with, and you're right. Like you're either trying to get those quick throws, because you can't have all 6 guys go vertical. There's no room, so you're looking for those quick throws, and then obviously, usually you're going to get the wheel out of the box and some kind of QB draw. So I think it's huge, and we really haven't seen any snaps of it where we don't go empty and we don't get some kind of twist up front, even if it's just to kill the QB draw.
Yeah.
So sometimes you get the 3-man game. Sometimes you get the interior guys running the stunt. Like you said, sometimes we'll get that end crashing and let the tackle wrap around.
Yeah, you could even sometimes just drop the end. You might drop the end, just rush 3, and have another man in coverage just for that quick throw. Especially if it's going to be, you might have that end just go right to that middle void I was talking about, and then you keep the will inside on 3, and then maybe the end might get himself a pick.
Yeah, there you go. And I think too, like it all depends on who you're playing, but if you can play man, it simplifies a lot of things, like you said, right? Because you're going to force the ball out. They're protecting with 5, they're in empty, right? If you can bring 6 and play man and survive in that, it puts a lot of pressure on the offense to execute.
Yeah, definitely does.
So, kind of my last question. We talked about a few things already, but if you could go back and tell, or 2 more questions. If you can go back and tell your high school self as a player, what's one piece of advice you would give high school guys that, maybe have already experienced some success and are hoping to make the jump to university, maybe even hoping to make the jump to the pros? What would be one piece of advice you have for those guys?
Well, in high school, I'd say what we talked about earlier, study the game. Like, one thing I realized, especially going from high school to university, like, you're not as good as you think you are. Like, there's always someone out there better. Especially when you come in as a rookie, you got guys who are in their 4th and 5th year who are getting ready for the CFL draft. Like, you got some really good players, so that you get a chance to learn from. So in high school, just kind of focus on the game and keep training, because you could always get better, and take initiative to watch film. Like, I stress watching film, because the more you know about football, the slower the game will be for you. That's one thing I always preach to my athletes now that I coach in my camp. Just, hey, watch film, especially during these quarantine times. You have nothing but time. Watch some film, get better at football. Get better at football mentally.
Yeah, I think that's huge. People always talk about, I got to get a little faster, or that player is great because he's so quick. But I think that mental processing speed is something that, whether you're new to football or you've been playing for 10 years, you can get better at.
Yeah,
right?
You could run 4-2 and not be good at football because you don't know the game. And you see that a lot. You see a lot of guys get drafted, especially NFL. Raiders at least pick everyone that ran fast. So they run a 4-2, 4-3. I'm going to draft them, and they see how they don't transition well.
Yeah, it's something that now, like I even remember, we were in high school around the same time. I remember my dad was our high school coach. We'd have the old VHS film tape. Now these guys can pull up their phone, just as easily as they can order a pizza. They can watch, USC linebacker tape if they want, right?
Yeah.
So it's crazy, and the resources are out there. So I think now more than ever, that's such a great point.
Yeah, you can definitely just keep studying. You can look at linebackers any position. You can look at any position of guys that are at the same level as you. university level or even pros, because you can always learn something from everyone. Even now, like I always look at different linebackers in the CFL for me to get better still.
Yeah, and like we said at the start, you got to let that love of the game take you somewhere, right? Like you're going to enjoy it, but a lot of guys are right now feeling that, man, like I'd love to be at football practice. You may not be able to be at football practice, but there's a lot you can do. Similar type question, but on the coaching side of it, you were a big time player at Laurier, big time high school player. You've achieved a lot of those goals that as coaches we hope for our guys to achieve. And I think one of the things that a lot of guys, kind of ask me about, and I've been, my experience at Laurier, I've worked with some really good players, but like, what advice do you have for high school or community coaches that are coaching a team with, all abilities on it, but they have a few elite guys? What would be your advice to coaches that are coaching elite players?
For coaches that are coaching elite players,
Yeah, just for dealing with them specifically, like helping those guys get to some of their goals.
well, I say don't treat them any better than you treat anyone else on your team. Like sometimes they might know they're the best, but sometimes you got to be harder on them so they keep working hard. Because usually when some people are so good and way above their competition level, they kind of start to slack off. They don't have to work as hard. So I say kind of keep pushing those athletes and don't be afraid to even talk to them one-on-one and just be like, hey, I see your potential. I just need you to get better in this ways. Always be a little more critical on them for ways that it can improve. Because I feel that's what helped me. I had a high school coach who, yeah, he knew I was the best player on the team, but he didn't treat me like I was the best player on the team. He would always be there to make sure I'm working hard. If I wasn't working hard, he'd call me out in front of the whole team. And I was one of the captains. He had no problem calling me out. So, and that was one thing that I thank him for to this day, because it kind of helped me improve my work ethic to continue to get better.
Yeah, and I think it's a tough job. Some of those high schools. I mean, my dad was a high school coach, and you got three or four coaches for a team of 50 guys, and it's a tough job, man. We got it easy at the university level when you got 10, 12, 14 coaches on staff.
Yeah,
Um,
the position coach, like everyone said.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, and I often think too is as a coach, you have those guys that are playing really well, and keeping that in perspective for them of where they're at, right? Like your goals are to be a CFL player, you should be dominating high school. Like this is good, great job, keep working hard, but more so praising the effort than the results, right? Because that effort's going to be what keeps driving them to get better, like you said. If you weren't
Yeah.
if you weren't working as hard as everybody else, your coach is going to make sure to call you out. He might not call every guy out, you know what I mean? But he's got those expectations for you as saying, hey, you got these goals. You want to be a U Sports player. You want to be a CFL player, right? You got to have that same standard of work. So even if you're, coaching a guy whose performance is great, right, because he's playing at a lower level of competition, you're really focusing on praising that effort.
Yeah, exactly. Just because if you're a top player on your team, you're gonna have the rest of the team's gonna look up to you. And if they see you slacking off, then they might think, hey, it's okay if I do it too. And that brings down the whole team level. And the ultimate goal is you're here to win. So you gotta make sure everyone is kind of at full capacity. You know what I mean? Everyone's going as hard as they can every time they're on the field.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of teams, I've been fortunate enough to have some of my guys that I coach in the summer that have been doing some of the stuff with your team, your camp that you're working on with Impulse Football. Huge, huge resource, I think, for young guys in the Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge area. And I was actually out at a couple of your camps because a couple of my players were there. What's it been like as you start? You're obviously still playing, but also taking on a bit of a coaching role in the community. What's that been like for you, and what really brings you to spend your time that way with young athletes?
Honestly, it's been awesome, man. Like I love doing it. I think we just finished our fourth year. So we're currently planning our fifth year right now. But no, why I kind of want to do this because growing up, I didn't have camps like this. All the camps where pro athletes were all in the States, or like the big camps, competitive camps, they weren't really near me. So, and I also couldn't afford to go to some that were close to me. So I figured, why not put on a camp for kids who grew up just like me, or growing up just like I did, to give them more experience than what I had, to help them grow as players, even young men. Because also, I feel like as like players, we have a duty to continue to grow the Canadian football game and kind of want kids to continue to play this game and want them to continue to get better at this game. And kind of, because you know how like Americans think they're so much better than us, we want to kind of close that gap between Canadian football players and American football players. And you see these days more and more Canadian guys who played their whole life in Canada getting D1 scholarships to go in the States. So that's something that we take pride in at Impulse Football, to continue just coaching our athletes up as best as we can.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. I think I had 7 or 8 guys that I coached directly that were part of your camp there in the winter. Some of them have done more stuff with you in the past, but it's awesome to see. And I think that access to really good coaching is something that's really cool for guys in our community to have. So I know SA's doing that with you, Ronnie. Lots of other guys that I think I saw Nakas out there, Morelli, former Golden Hawk guys working together. So, big props on that. And I can't speak highly enough of the experience my guys had there. So, appreciate you giving back to the game that way, and appreciate you giving some time to talk to us. All the best as we continue to get through this quarantine thing one day at a time. And hopefully we're watching you on Saturday sooner than later.
Yeah, I hope so, man. I appreciate you having me on here, man. It's been fun.